Using slow shutter speed in your photography is a fantastic way to introduce a little bit of twist, a little bit of creativity, and make your photos a little bit more interesting. It can turn the mundane into something a little bit more eye-catching. But how do we do it exactly? At first it might look a little bit complex. It's getting into the manual settings and playing around with shutter speeds and all this complicated stuff. But actually it's not that bad. So let's take a look at 3 ways that we can use shutter speed creatively. The first method is quite easy. You're choosing a static object. It can be a person or an object that is standing in one place, but that place should have some movement around him. It can be cars, it can be other people moving around. And what we do, we are focusing on that particular person. By reducing the speed of our shutter, we will introduce some kind of movement around him. And that creates this abstract feeling that is so eye-catching and can create quite interesting photographs. So the steps are quite simple. First of all is to focus on our main subject, make sure that he is nice and sharp. The second one is to get myself very nice and stable. Because we're going to work with slower shutter speeds, we will have to be as stable as possible, because a little bit of movement will blur our main subject. We don't want him blurred. We want only the moving parts around him to be blurred. The static one should be sharp, so that requires us to be stable and not moving as well. And the second step is to just take the photo with the shutter speed settings that we find suitable for that kind of movement. So here most of the people get confused. What is the right shutter speed for which kind of movement? So I have simple guidelines that I think might help you. For people walking around and generally slow action, 1/4 to 1/15 of a second should be enough shutter speed to introduce some motion. If you see that the people are really slow and they're not moving enough, you can go down even by half of a second or even to 1 second, but that will require from you to be extremely stable, or perhaps using a tripod or monopod, something to stabilize your camera. If you got bikes and car passing by, these are moving a little bit faster. So we can try using shutter speeds from 1/50th of a second to 1/60th of a second. That will allow the cars not to disappear. We still want to have some details of the moving object. If we don't match the correct speed and we do the shutter speed too slow, the moving subject will just pass too quickly in front of our camera and they will be basically invisible for the eye. We don't want that. We want to have some kind of smear. And for example, if you want to capture a static objects and flying birds at pigeon, it's a very common scene in street photography. I would start from something like 1/60th of a second and go up, go higher. It depends how much you want to blur the movement of the wings of the birds. Sometimes 1 to 125 will be enough. Sometimes 1 to 60 will be enough. So you need to experiment a little bit. Take one photo with a slower shutter speed, take one photo with a faster shutter speed. You can use the shutter speed priority setting in your camera. You not necessarily need to go manual with that one. Just switch to shutter speed priority and adjust the shutter speed settings there. The general rule of thumb is as faster your moving objects are, the faster your slow shutter speed should be. So for people who are walking slower, you will use slower speeds. For birds or for example a racing car, you will use a faster one. The key elements to make that method works are finding clear static object, someone that is not moving and that is quite interesting. The second criteria is to have some movement around there. The third criteria is to have a good background. If the background is too cluttered and if you also have the slow shutter speed movement around, altogether can be a little bit overload for the eye. You want a relatively clear background, clear subject and something moving. And together it's a good formula for success. For this particular method, you are not necessarily limited by any type of lens. Alright, so let's flip things around and go to method number 2. The second method with slow shutter speed is called panning. With panning, we're doing the opposite thing. Instead of finding a static object, we're actually choosing a moving object that interests us, and we are slowly moving after him with our slow shutter speed exposure. What is cool about this effect is that the main subject that we choose to follow remains sharp, and the rest of the scene gets blurred, which gives kind of an abstract background, an interesting background for that. So here's a little bit of a bonus tip. If you have some interesting lights behind, these can blur really nicely with the panning effect. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the panning one is more difficult than the one with the static objects, because here you really need to make few things combine together and work well. So let's see what are the key elements to make this technique work. One of the most important things is that you need to track the moving objects exactly with the same speed that they're moving. If the car is moving fast, you need to move fast. If the object is moving slow, you need to move slow. If your movement is not sync, it will just result in a blurry photo. The second one is you need to make sure not to lose focus on that object. Let's take an example that you are photographing several scooters running together. You need to make sure that your focus will remain on the one that you intended in the first place and not jump around through the scene. To do that, we should use continuous focus tracking. Some cameras are better with that, some cameras are worse, but I find that for panning, most of the camera manufacturers can do a pretty good job. Just make sure not to use like pinpoint, like one point focus. Try to take some area and just place that object that you want to track in that area and track it slowly with the same speed that he is moving. To get a higher chance for success, just use burst mode, basically series shootings of several shots a second, and that will maximize your chance through the movement to get a sharp image. With panic, lens choice does matter. Well, technically you can do it with any lens, but if you're doing it with a tool of a long lens, for example, 100mm and higher, like 135 or 200mm, you will really need to be really stable and be able to track it really precisely. With a 50mm lens, the tracking would be significantly easier. If you take a lower than 50mm, for example, 35 or 24, you will get more of the scene, but your object that you're tracking will be quite small and the panning effect will be just weaker. So I think 50, 70mm, this is the sweet spot, and you can just try and use these kind of lenses. The way you're moving in panning, it should be with your body, not with your hands. Don't try to use it with extended hands, because your extended hands, they're not stable. And when you're moving and excited, you will probably be all over the place. So to nail the shot sharper, you need to tuck your elbows in, put one hand under the lens, other hand on the camera, and just use your body movement to track the subject. Use your body movement. That's it, like this. Good, I hope you got that one. And there is one other small thing to consider. The type of movement is also important. You want to choose things that are moving smoothly. Walking people, running people, people on a bicycle, they're all challenging. Simply because the movement is not consistent. They're going up and down. Other than just moving in one direction, they're also going up and down. You might predict the movement speed correctly, but you have nothing that you can do with the person's movements ups and down. So just focus on things that are moving in a predictable way, like scooters and cars. With panning, we need to choose a little bit higher shutter speeds than with static subjects. I think that 1/25 of the second would probably be the point to start, and as faster the object is moving, the faster you will run with your shutter speed. I think for moving cars, you can be at 1/30 of a second or 1/50 of a second, depends on the speed of the movement. Do you know how many attempts it took me to capture this guy on the skateboard relatively sharp? I think it was at least 10-15 tries, because he's moving with the skateboard, moving with the skateboard, moving with the skateboard. So I just need to capture the moment that he's on it and just sliding without doing anything with his hands and with his body. So it took me quite a lot of attempts, but eventually I was lucky to capture him. So all right, let's move to method number 3. Method number 3 involves flash, which makes things a little bit more interesting and a little bit more challenging. Let's see how we deal with that one. That is really popular technique in street photography. It creates quite dynamic and interesting results. The basic idea that you use the camera flash to freeze the passing object, while it allows the ambient light and the movement to create these nice smears, something like that. To make this thing work properly, there is a setting in your flash, rear curtain flash sync. Usually it's on the front one. Now, what does it mean? Usually the way the camera is set, you first flash and then you have your exposure. What we want to achieve is first to open the exposure and make the flash at the end. For this method, you would want to set your shutter speed somewhere around 1/25 of the second to 1/30 of a second. Sometimes to introduce more blur and more smearing, you would go lower with the shutter speed. And to have a shorter blurs, you would go a little bit higher, but I wouldn't go higher than 1/50 of a second, because still that's the idea, right? That's what we want to use the flash for. This technique works really well during dusk times or on a very well lit night street, but it does not work proper in complete darkness or during daytime. So you kind of need to time it to a specific time of the day to practice it. But the results when doing it correctly, they're outstanding. They're nothing to compare with. And with the flash, if you have the possibility, just pick up one of these flashes that have a remote trigger. Otherwise, you will have the flash on your camera and it will just give direct in the face flashes. If you have a flash that is remote, you can hand the flash in one hand and then kind of throw the flash on the side that you want the light to come from. So it's already fine-tuning the direction of the flash and everything. It might be a little bit too complicated, but at the beginning you can try just with whatever you have. Okay, so let's wrap it up a little bit with some bonus tips. All these methods work wonderfully if the light is not super hard. At the moment the light gets too strong, we would probably have overexposed images because we're going very low with our shutter speed. Sometimes f16 is just simply not enough to maintain normal exposure. In that case, we should consider using an ND filter. ND filter is just like sunglasses for the camera. It reduces the amount of light getting in. It's just a dark filter that darkens everything that our camera sees, just similar to sunglasses. So once you have your ND filter, you can experiment with slow shutter speeds also during the daytime. I don't know many people shooting that way, but it's something to try and maybe you can get an interesting result. And my second bonus tip probably repeats from almost every video that I'm doing. Just pay attention to the background because the background is very, very important to how your photograph reads. If the background is too busy or not matching properly or have too many objects that will distract you from what you're trying to photograph, the photo will be not good. So try to focus on cleaner backgrounds that will make your subject pop better and tell the story that you're trying to photograph in a better way. Now we need to understand that with slow shutter speeds, you will not get immediately very good results. It's all trial and error. I gave you the basic settings. Just try and see what you're getting. I'm pretty sure that with one session you kind of can get the idea of what are you doing. If you get out 2-3 times outside, with practice you will get the better results and the more interesting photographs. And when you're practicing, just take a look at your photograph and try to understand what was the mistake that you've done. Was it the subject that you chose? Was it the background that you chose? Were you not stable enough? Or the shutter speed setting was too slow or too fast? Was my camera smooth enough, especially for panning? Identify the reason and try again and again, and eventually you will get a good photograph out of this slow shutter speed experiment. And remember that shooting technique is just a tool. Any shooting technique that you're learning is just a tool. Don't let the photo to be just about the blur effect. You need to have some story in mind. You want to show something and you're using the slow shutter speed to show that something. Don't do it just because of the shutter speed. Like, we have enough photographs of blurred cars already. So just try to find something interesting. All right, I hope you learned something today and you know the drill. Like and subscribe. See you next time.